Alright, in my previous tutorial I showed you how to make these different wooden pieces, to name them and organize them. Oh, it looks like I never called the wood post _01, so there we go. So now I have all these individual pieces here and I've saved them all off. Since I just renamed that 01, I'm just going to save over that wood elements 01, and now I'm going to say File, Save As, and save back over wood elements 02. There we go. All right, so now I'm on my 2 version. My wood post is named, my other one's named. So I had shown you at the beginning of the previous tutorial this weapon rack, which is kind of what we want to build. All right. So I'm just going to occasionally use Alt-Tab to bounce back and forth between programs. All right. So let's see. The other option, of course, is if I go ahead and I just make a plane out here in the world, and I'm going to make it square. So 250, oops, 250 by 250, length and width is 1. Let's kind of move this back and open our material editor. Assign material to selection, navigate to that folder, drag the weapon rack image in, and just assign it. Right click, say assign material to selection, close it. So now I can actually see the reference here in my map if I want. Right. So I'll show you another trick here. I'm going to right click and say convert to edit poly. There's an option in edit poly under edit geometry called preserve UVs. And if you click on it, if I go into edge here, and click on this edge and just move it down, see how it doesn't change the UVs? Right? Normally, if you're just moving that down, everything would squish. But what it's doing is it's actually preserving them. Right? It's keeping them where they are. And so it's one way to kind of crop down your reference real easy. But you want to always remember to turn that off, because it's something that's easy to forget that it's on, because it is so powerful. But as soon as you start moving things again, you're gonna really regret it. Oops. So let's get out of edit poly. We'll just kind of move this over here. Right click, go to object properties, turn on backface cull, turn off show frozen in gray, and hit OK. Right click on it, say free selection. Now I can kind of maximize this viewport. If I click on a beam and rotate around, you see there's my ref. So this is kind of what I'm trying to get. So let's start by, we're going to grab all these pieces and kind of move them over to the side here. Just kind of whoop, drag them over. We're just going to grab this board, right click and say clone as a copy. And I'm just going to enter its X value as 0 to center it in the world. And then let's go to rotate. I'm going to turn on my angle snap now, but I'm going to change its Y value to 90. And then let's set the X to -100. Oops, I'm still in rotate. We want to undo that. Let's go to move, set the X to -100, and there we go. All right. So we're kind of starting off with our plank here, right, to kind of get a sense of how wide we want it. Let's grab this post, clone it as a copy, and let's just move that over to 0. And so we'll kind of move it over. We want our beams to kind of, or planks to kind of overlap the edge. So let's maybe just do like -75. Oops, -75 would be good. And we'll go right click, clone it as a copy, and set it to +75 by just deleting that negative. And then one thing we want to keep in mind as we copy our elements, right? There is a certain pattern that happens, and if we're looking at it from certain angles, we may see that pattern happening, repeating. So as we clone objects, we're going to want to go into rotate and rotate them 90 degrees. I have my angle snap turned on, and so it makes it easier for me to rotate something of value of 90 degrees. All right, so let's kind of take this plank. Let's move out here to the left. I'm going to kind of move this over here, and we'll kind of set our, let's get the 2 in here that we need. We're going to need one about here, I believe Control V, yes, is the shortcut for clone. So we'll clone it as a copy again and move it down. Maybe we'll tune these. Maybe put this one at like, let's say 84 or 85. And this one we'll put at like, what's 150 like? There we go. So now we have those two kind of in there. That's cool. Now the problem is, if you look at them, they both have the same kind of wood patterning. So we need to do something about that. Let's take this guy and rotate it 180 degrees. Oops. You can always double check to make sure, just make sure that all the values are some variation of 0 to 270. Right, like this would be 90. Right, you want that rotated 90 degrees. All right. It looks like it's the same thing though. What if I rotate this 180 and then move it over to be positive 100? All right, now I see different patterning happening. That's good. That's what I really want. All right, I'm going to want to get these two beams. I'm going to get those on the back side, but also let's make sure that they're actually flush. So kind of over a little bit. You can always check this out. I'm going to hover over this edge, just drag it up. There we go. You can distort your viewports like that. And then when you're done, you just right click and say reset layout. All right, grab my two planks here, right click, clone as a copy, rotate them 180 degrees, and then move them back. And actually, we got my move to center. Let's just select one, and that value is negative 7.5 on the Y, because the Y is like this. So we could select these and just do 7.5. There we go. And look, does it look like we have the same pattern on both? No, right? This pattern, I don't see the exact same pattern over there, and that's what we're trying to avoid, kind of repetition. All right, so we're off to a good start. We kind of have the upper part. Now let's start building that lower section. And so let's kind of take the planks. We can, come back to the original. Right click and clone it as a copy. And what did we say those beams were at? Negative 75. Yep, perfect. And then we're going to rotate it. Get this at negative 90. And then we'll kind of move this out. All right. And let's go ahead and we're going to select our beams. 1, 2, hold control to click, select both. Right click, clone as a copy and say OK. And now I want to get that kind of angle that's happening there. And so we're just going to rotate these 45 degrees. And then I'm just going to move them down. It's really a question of how steep we want that angle. I think this will probably be good. Right. And so let's right click, convert to edit poly on both of these. I'm going to put an edit poly on, and that edit poly is going to be shared across both of them. Let's just go into element, select those elements, and I'm going to right click and go into, I want to go into scale, but I need to change the selection center to pivot point center because I want to scale them, because you see how there's this kind of weird shading happening here? It's kind of flickering like that. It's because they're the same size. We want these to be a little bit thinner. So I'm just going to scale them, and it looks like I'm going to need to do them one at a time, which is fine. I'll just grab the one and kind of scale that down a little bit. And if you're wondering how much, just kind of look here. We want it to come in just past like the bevel, and it doesn't need to be perfect. There we go. Okay, so now I have my two pieces. Top level, let's region select both of them, and I'm going to go into element and region select. So I have both those elements selected. And under edit geometry, I'm going to use this tool called slice plane, and I'm just going to lower this little plane that's here to just under where this plank is here and hit slice. And then I'm going to come over here and rotate it. And again, I still have my angle snap on, so it makes it easier to rotate it 90 degrees. Oops, come on. There we go. And we'll move it over so it's just past that outer bevel. And we'll slice there. And now, if I turn off slice plane, I can region select the bottom. Oops, we got to go into polygon for this. I can region select the bottom and delete that. And then region select the upper part and delete that. So now I just have these little portions here, which is pretty cool. All right, go back to top level there. And so now I have both of those. Let's right click, convert to edit poly so that they're individuals again. Right click, clone them as copies, and let's rotate them 180 degrees. And then we're going to move them back. And so you see how I'm kind of building this object out of these already UV unwrapped portions. And we can build multiple objects using these wooden parts. And it's going to save us texture memory because we're just reusing that wood. All right, so let's take a look at our plank here. If we move, let's just center that along the y-axis to, nope, that's not going to work. There we go. If I set it to -100, that centers it. So there's a couple things we could do. We can maybe, let's see what happens if we scale it. I'm going to change my scale to object center. Let's scale it in a bit. You gotta be careful how much you're scaling it. At this point, I'm scaling it in about 50%. And so the trick is to look at it, and you need to kind of make your own judgment call. Does this wood grain look distorted versus this one? And I'm going to say it doesn't. I think we're probably at a point where it's probably okay. It's not too much. That's all right. I do see that because we have the bevel, there's, it is kind of coplanar with this post. So let's just make it just a touch wider. There we go. And I'm just going to right click and clone it as a copy and say okay. And we're just going to go to move. And so that's the X. We want to move it to the X value. And so we'll just remove the negative. And so now we have one over here. And let's just rotate it 180 degrees so that we get a variation in the pattern across the 2 feet. Always try to keep that in mind. All right, so it's all coming together pretty good. I think the next thing is to just get more planks kind of along here at the bottom. So we'll right click and we will clone this as a copy again. And this time I'm going to rotate it 180 and 180. And then I'm going to come over here and just move it. And then let's rotate it. And if we had our angle snap on when we move these guys, it should be easy enough. I'll just kind of move that into position here. Oh, and then we just need to center it. So let's just move that over to put the X at 100. There we go. All right, so we kind of have that beam. And it looks like maybe it should be a little lower. So I'm going to go into move and switch to the local axis. Just slide it down just a little bit. There we go. Nice. And then we'll clone it as a copy and say OK. And we'll just change our move back to view. We're going to rotate the whole thing 180. And then just move it back on the opposite side. What's the Y value here? Negative. So I could copy that, select this one, paste it, but just remove the negative and hit enter. That did nothing. Okay, fair enough. Oh, it's the X value that I need. So we'll just change this to 0. Nope, it needs to be -100. There we go. All right, so look at all these great pieces I have coming together. So looks like probably the last thing that we really need is we just need to get in the little wooden sections that are on there, right? So let's go ahead and get those. It does look like we could use another beam. So maybe, oops, clone this as a copy, rotate it 90 degrees. Just gonna make sure it's 90 down here. And then let's move it over. I'm just gonna rotate it -90. I'm just gonna scale it a little bit. Make sure it's sitting at 0 on the Y plane. And then here in the front, I wanna make sure that it's kind of centered here in the world. And then just right. And then I could scale it. I don't need to though. Let's see if I scale it some. That's fine. I could scale it a little bit. One thing that would be useful though is I don't need the caps on the end. So if I go into Element and click on it, well, let's turn on Edge Faces. It's going to help a little bit. And then go F3 to go to wireframe. I'm going to hold. I'm going to go into Polygon and hold Alt and deselect the polygons in the center and just delete the caps because you're not going to see those. Those are inside the geometry. So then I can just grab that, and here in the front, just kind of move that over a little bit so that it's closer to the edge. There we go. All right. Top level, F3 to see the whole thing. All right, this is looking really good. All right, what's our next step? You know, so a great next step is to say File, Save As, and I'm going to call this Weapon Rack. So I'm not saving over, I'm just going to make a brand new object. All right, so here we go. Here's everything's looking really good. The last thing is going to be getting the little pegs for our swords. So let's do it like this. I'm going to right click, clone on this as a copy, and move it over. And I'm just going to rotate it 90 degrees. Just make sure the X value down there is at 90. And I'm going to move it up because I want it kind of lined up here. There we go. Let's maximize this view. I want it kind of lined up. Let's move this. Kind of want to see the end sticking out there. And let's go into Element. Just grab the whole thing. I'm going to turn on Slice Plane. And I want to move it kind of down here to the end. And I'm going to kind of slice it here. And then let's turn off Slice Plane and grab these polygons in polygon mode. Delete those. Delete these. Grab this part, right click, and go into Rotate. Rotate that 180 and then move it down. There we go. We'll turn on Slice Plane again. And it's sitting in the same spot, so I just hit Slice. And then I can grab these polygons out here. And now in Element, I can just kind of take all this and kind of move it over a little bit. Let's give it a decent amount of space. All right, if we're not sure if that's going to be enough space for our sword, we could always say File, Import, and navigate to where our gladius is. And import our low poly gladius. Hey, there it is. Just kind of move it over, and we can see we're going to want it to kind of sit between those pegs. So if we grab one of these, oops, let's just go into wireframe. Grab one of these and move it over. There we go. And then we'll have our gladius kind of sitting on there. So by gladius, select it and delete it. All right. So there's those guys. And then it's kind of, you know, how many of these do you want, right? And so what we can do, let's have them sitting further out. Looks like we got plenty of polygons for it. So we'll just grab these elements and kind of move them out. Sitting up there. There we go. And we can take this and Control V to clone it as a copy. So, okay, let's move that over once. And when we move it, we're going to go into Rotate. And I think probably go into Hierarchy, Effect Only, Pivot Only, and Center to Object. Yeah, that's good. Turn that off. And then we'll rotate this 180-ish. to get the variety in. We can grab both of them, Control V as a copy, and then just kind of move them over. It depends how many we want in here. You'll grab one more time, Control V as a copy, move it over. And then what I'm going to do for this last one is just go into Element and click on these, go to Rotate, and just rotate it just a little bit, so the pattern is slightly different. So now we can come in here, and if I have one of them selected, let's go into Wireframe. I got the one selected. Let's go ahead and just in Attach, just click, and I'm doing this in Wireframe so I don't actually attach all the pieces together because I don't want to do that yet. All right, there we go. And so is that kind of sort of centered, perfect. Control V to clone as a copy, raise this up, and then I'm just going to rotate all of these guys. Let's Effect Pivot Only, Center to Object. I'm going to rotate all these guys 180. All right, just make sure, yeah, 180. And I can grab them both. Control V as a copy, rotate them 180, and then just move them back on the other side, just in case you want weapons on the back side as well. All right. So there we go. There's our weapon rack. I think that's looking pretty cool. Right click, unfreeze all, select that background image and delete it. All right. And now let's select our original wood pieces, right click and say hide selected. Yep. And I'm going to save this. It's already been saved once as weapon rack. And now I'm just going to come in here and under create, I'm going to make a box. And I'm going to come down here and zero out that box in the world. Right click on it, convert to edit poly. And then in edit poly and element, click on that box and hit delete. Right? I'm getting rid of those old verts because what I want to do is go into attach and just grab everything that's visible in the scene and attach them all together. Click in negative space. If I hit F4, you'll see these are all one object now. Right? So if I get out of edit poly, when I go to move them, there they are. Right? And their origin is at 0, their rotation is all at 0, and their scale is at 100% across the board. So we don't have any weird kind of weird stuff that's going to mess it up if we try and bring it in a game engine. We'll just want to come up here and name it your initials underscore weapon rack. All right, and here's the last thing I want to do. See, we got our cool UVs. All right, make sure you save. Got our cool UVs on there. I'm going to put an unwrapped UVW, and I'm going to come up here. I'm going to find channel. I'm going to change my map channel from 1 to 2, and I want to say move. All right, so I'm going to take all that UV data that's in UV1, I'm going to move it to UV2, and I'm going to open the UV editor. Now all of these, I'm just going to region select in Polygon, and I'm just going to hit quick peel. It's going to quick peel them. I'm going to say tools, relax, switch to Polygon, and relax those a little bit. And then I just hit pack custom. And now what I have is I have a second set of UVs where everything is laid out completely unique, so I can utilize this for what we call light maps. So I'm going to close the UV editor here. Now, if your texture does not line up properly anymore, that's because you didn't change the channel from 1 to 2. All right, you want to make sure that you're on channel 2. You won't see any difference visually, but if you go into the UV editor, everything will be different. You can even grab it and move it, and if I hit F2 so you can see more clearly, nothing changes because I'm in UV2. So I'm going to undo that so everything fits inside 0 to 1. That's because we have 2 sets of UVs. Right click, convert to edit poly. Now this weapon rack is going to be ready to be used in a game engine. So let's go ahead. I'm going to put edit poly on here, copy the name of it, and say file, export selected, and in that same wood elements folder, I'm going to say my BN weapon rack and hit save. And so then later, I can bring this into Unreal when we start doing that in the coming weeks.